before we get into that, we are going to cover. We had a viewer question. That was I thought it was a really, really good question that came up last week that they asked, and they said, "Well, when you die, what happens?" And there's a couple theories there. I mean, do you just sleep until Christ returns, or do you go and be with Christ now? So which one of those is it? What is your, what they said, what happens? I need to know. And so I thought that was a great question, Justin. I thought it was something that was very sincere, and they wanted to know. So I think we just take a few minutes and just talk about that. Okay. And so, of course, the sleep that where that comes from is from Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiastes chapter 9. I'm going to flip there just so we can read that verse. But what it basically says is that the dead know nothing, and so it'll take me just a minute to find Ecclesiastes.
Which as you're turning there, I'll go ahead and make the reference to Paul. Paul also mentioned something similar to that in his writings in Thessalonians. In 1 Thessalonians 4:13 says, "Those who sleep in death."
Right, he calls believers sleep. Right, he calls refers to them as sleeping.
Yeah. So you do have that.
So there's a couple places in Scripture where we do get this from. The original goes all the way back to Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 5, which says, "For the living know they will die, but the dead do not know anything, nor have they any longer a reward, for the memory of them is forgotten." Then on down in verse 10, it says, "Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for there is no working or explaining or knowing or wisdom in Sheol where you are going." And so it's saying when you die, you're like asleep. And so which one of those is it? And so that's the topic we need to talk about just real quick. And of course, we can't do a whole podcast on that, but we do want to take some time and just talk about it. The thing with Ecclesiastes and where this first starts is he's talking about human perspective. Everything you see in Ecclesiastes is under the sun. And so when we look at this in context, and you've heard me say context 1,000 times, but when you look at it in context, we're looking from a human perspective of what's going on. And to a human, when you die, you're dead. And so that's what Solomon is referring to there when he writes Ecclesiastes. It's from that human perspective. But when you start looking at how did Jesus refer to this? What did Jesus say? What did he refer to it as? What Jesus tells the thief on the cross is, "You'll be with me today in paradise." What Paul says is he longs to depart from the body and be with Christ. So when we start looking at what Jesus says about it, what Paul said about it, we have this conflict. Which one is it? And so that's kind of where we are. And that's kind of what we get to. And so when you start studying and you start digging into this, and you start looking at what sleep means, in Scripture, sleep can mean a metaphor for physical death. But there is a difference in the body and the soul. And so for the body, there is this sleep. There is this period where it's not functioning. But the soul is immediately with Christ. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the take on that. Sleep is referring to the body. It's not referring to spirit. It's referring to the grave, waiting the resurrection. But the soul is alive and with the Lord. Yeah. And so, death is not a separation. It's a separation of body and spirit. But you're not separated from consciousness, I guess you would say. Right. And so the body and the spirit will be reunited at the resurrection. But the sleep is this temporary state of the body and not of the mind, not of the spirit. And your spirit and your soul is immediately with Christ. If you're a believer. Yeah. If you're a believer. And so that's kind of the short answer to that, I guess. Yeah. Hope that makes sense. Hope that answers what you were talking about and asking for.